Hello, happy Friday, and welcome to Sound Off with System One. I am your host, Allie Moen, and I am here with two of our recruiting experts to talk to you today about how to get the compensation that you deserve. Before diving in, a few words about System One. System One is a leading provider of specialized, highly technical outsourced services and workforce solutions to critical infrastructure, technology, life sciences, and government sectors, putting more than 650 employees and 10,000 contractors to work in the United States, Canada, the UK, and Brazil. As you're tuning in today, please join us in the comments to let us know where you're joining from. And if you have any questions related to today's topic, please drop those in there as well. We will be monitoring those and responding to them as they come in, and hopefully being able to answer a few of those live for you. Without further ado, I'm going to have our experts introduce themselves and share a hot job with you. You can search those opportunities as well as all others with System One by scanning the QR code in the top of the screen or by going to jobs.system1.com. Janita, let's start with you.
Hi, welcome to our Sound Off with System One. I am Janita Carter. I have been with System One for over 24 years. I am in the power and industry sector. My job for today is Senior Engineering Project Manager in Charlotte, North Carolina. This position would be working with an engineering, procurement, and construction firm. We are looking for someone with heavy engineering background, an engineering degree with a PE, 10 years worth of experience. This position will be in the power generation industry or field, building combined cycle power plants, simple cycle power plants, large scale design projects.
Hiring process, do most candidates have the most leverage and don't even realize it?
Sure. So when I start working with a candidate, when I make that first initial contact with them, and I ask them, what is your salary requirement? And they are not willing to divulge that, that leaves me kind of at a loss, knowing whether they are at a good, if I can afford them or if I cannot afford them. So not willing to work with your recruiter and talk with your recruiter about what kind of pay or salary requirements you have can kind of limit you. It could even kick you out of the process if you're not willing to partner with them.
Let me just backtrack here. So in my experience, in terms of, the point in the hiring process where most candidates give up the most leverage, right? I think accepting too quickly, first of all, before negotiations take place, and disclosing salary expectations or, current salary too early. So that's if you're working directly with a client or manager. Now, during the initial screening or early interview stages, I think by disclosing your current salary or providing a specific salary expectation too soon, that is another factor to consider. The premature disclosure, I think, allows employers to just anchor the negotiations, and often I see that it results in an offer that's based on the candidate's past pay rather than the value of the new role that you're applying to.
Great. Thank you so much, Eliza. And I'm going to stick with you for our next question. If you could walk us through what a well-prepared candidate looks like when they come to the offer stage and talk a little bit about what they've done before that conversation even starts.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think researching the market compensation for that role or that industry, also knowing the location and researching the company and knowing what your skill sets are, I think that's key. But also at this stage, I think you should already have a mindset of what compensation you can afford at the bare minimum, and to what is your ideal compensation.
I agree with Eliza. you should have built a relationship with your recruiter if you're working with a recruiter like System One. And so that recruiter should know kind of where you sit. They know about the client that we have, they know about you, and they're able to be transparent. The employer or the candidate should be transparent with the recruiter or the hiring manager about what compensation that they're looking for.
Yeah, thank you, Janita. And our next question, what parts, of an offer do candidates almost never think to negotiate, but absolutely should?
Sure. Well, when you're talking about a job, lots of my jobs are filled across the United States. And so when you start looking at those things, sometimes candidates forget about relocation. What's that going to look like? Is there per diem offered? And they forget to talk about those things when we're in the negotiation phase or even prior to the negotiation phase. The next thing that they forget, if you're working a remote role, sometimes with remote roles, the pay can be less than if you were sitting on site at a company site. But sometimes we forget to talk about who's going to pay for the internet, because I'm going to need internet to be in this role. I need to be connected with my team. How's the phone going to get paid? Those types of things. Those are items that could be negotiated, could be talked about during that negotiation phase, and most people forget about those few items.
Janita, I'm going to have you dive into our next question, which is, if a candidate feels they're being leveled too low, how do they make that case without coming across as out of touch?
Well, a candidate has to remember that there are budget constraints in play with every employer. And if you have a specific skill, you could highlight that. Real life example. I was hiring a man to work in a LNG plant, liquid natural gas plant, and he was doing some QA/QC work on the piping and specifically on the paint piping. Well, when you do liquid natural gas, there's a cryogenic portion of that freezes the gas down so that it can be transferred. Well, when you freeze paint, that paint cracks. So we were able to leverage his cryogenic experience, because that is a skill in the US that is not seen a lot. There's not a lot of people with cryogenic experience. And so we were able to leverage that to get him a better pay rate and negotiate better for him. So pulling out those skills, the experiences that you have that might be different than just what is seen on the job description can always help increase a monetary value.
Yep, absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head there. So remembering that there are budget constraints, but using your experience, your capabilities, your skill sets, all of those things to leverage that while you're negotiating for compensation. So thank you, Janita. Our next question, a candidate gets a competing offer and uses it as leverage. Can you walk us through how that might play out, best and worst case scenario?
So here at System One, the candidate should be working with a recruiter. And you have to remember that the recruiter is your best friend. The recruiter wants both sides to win. They want their client to win and they want the candidate to win. And so if you're not divulging to your recruiter that you have another offer, you're handicapping yourself, because a recruiter can go back to that client and say, look, I need you to know you like Mr. Mark and he's a great fit for your company, but he has another offer on the table. And we need to think about these things, or we're going to end up losing him as a possible employee for your hire, and you're not going to make your needs are not going to get met. And so if you don't divulge that to a recruiter, they don't know how to help you. Now, if you're working individually if you're out in the wild working without a recruiter, you have to handle that a little bit differently, because, you're representing yourself, and you do not want to come off as maybe falsifying some information or being greedy or those types of things. So you have to handle that a little bit differently. But if you work with System One, a staffing agency, we can handle those things for you and make it where it comes out positive for all parties.
Great. Thank you, Janita. And our next question, if a job is posted as on-site or hybrid, is there still room for negotiation? And what's the right way to test that?
Well, there's always room for negotiation in any employee hiring process that comes along. You don't know unless you ask. So, but in the same respect, you've got to be willing to accept no as an answer. For example, you're working on a hybrid role. You want to work from home on Mondays and Fridays. Well, maybe Mondays will not work for the client, but they could say, you could work hybrid on Wednesdays and Fridays. That might work for you. So the key is to be flexible, and, sometimes you're going to get a yes, sometimes you're going to get a no, but willing to be flexible and just ask the question, I think, is important.
Absolutely. If you don't ask, you're not going to know. I always like to say the worst they can say is no. There's no harm in asking and inquiring. So Janita, where does a negotiation end? And how can candidates know when to stop pushing and just make a decision?
Well, I say it's the tone of the conversation. Mm-hmm. If you're working with a recruiter can kind of manage that for you. And that recruiter can come back and go, you know what, you've pushed them as far as they're going to go. They're putting their foot down. They're done. This is the best you're going to get. And the ultimate goal is for everyone to be happy. The candidate to be happy, the employer to be happy, and the staffing agency. But you just have to gauge that, have good emotional intelligence, be able to read people, be able to read the room. I've seen people lose deals because they think that they're the best thing ever, and they end up losing the negotiation, and then they come back in a week and go, hey, I really want that job back. And now you've set a bad tone and it doesn't turn out good. So being able to read the room, being able to have emotional intelligence and kind of know where you're at, and listening to your recruiter. Your recruiter wants a candidate to win as much as they want the client to win. So being able to just read the room, I would say.
Absolutely. That tone is part of the impression that you're making in an interview, that the employer as well is making in the interview. So keeping that in mind and just being very careful to not let negotiation move to agitation. And then I do have one more question for you, Janita, and that is, what is the biggest negotiation myth that you want to squash right now?
Well, I would say most candidates believe that employers have no money constraints. They just believe they have this big pot of money, and that's not true. The truth is, everybody has a budget. Everybody has to live within their means. And that's the same, probably even more in business. A business has to live within its means because they can't afford to go out and spend a ton of money on someone that doesn't get a return for their investment. So I would say the biggest myth is that employers are not made out of money. They have a budget. They have to stay in those constraints of what their budget is, because ultimately they have to make money or they're not going to remain in business. So be willing to know that companies, they're just like you at home. You can't overspend or nobody wins.
Yep, absolutely. All great points, Janita. Well, that is all we have for you today. Janita, thank you for coming on Sound Off with System One. It's always a pleasure to have you on as a recruiting expert. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and for staying with us as we handled some technical difficulties that first half of this segment. So thank you again. Join us for our next Sound Off with System One. We will be hosting a live job seeker Q&A on Friday, May 1st at 2 p.m. Eastern. So we look forward to seeing you there. Please connect with Janita on LinkedIn and give System One a follow there as well. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a number of videos, all of our past Sound Off with System One segments, as well as expert job tips, leadership insights, success stories, and more. So thanks again and have a great Friday.
Goodbye.